Welcome to the New Monks. This podcast is dedicated to those of us on the journey of evolution. Through these episodes, we will dive into the lives of individual people and discover what they have learnt and how they have handled their growth. We believe that we all have wisdom to be shared with each other and can learn from listening to each other's stories. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you feel like leaving us a review and sharing the love, that would be greatly appreciated. Hello, and welcome back to the New Monks podcast. I'm Jay Muller, and today I'm talking to Corey. And this was such an insightful conversation. It was really great to get to know more about him and his journey, really, his past, and what has led him up to the beliefs and views that he has today. I first stumbled onto his Instagram page where he shares a lot, and it really resonated, and I really enjoyed reading it because it's very detailed, whatever he's talking about. It's very clear and very detailed. So it was great to get him on the podcast. And yeah, one of the things is that he's just been around so many different paths, so many different teachings, and down all the avenues, winding up to the place where he is now. So it was great to really get that. He's started off with martial arts, found his way into the plant medicine and psychedelic world, which he experimented with for quite some time. So he's got a big background in that. And then that journey eventually came to an end. And yeah, he describes why, and then finding more ancient practices such as Kriya Yoga, and then stumbling into the freedom teachings and Keylontic Science, which is also super interesting. I'm so interested in all of those perspectives and the science, really, because it really is the science. Yeah, it's really, really cool talking to him. And then we talk a bit about what's happening in the world at the moment and the split that is definitely being felt amongst a lot of us at the moment. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope you learn a lot from it, because there's a lot of information here that's coming to the light only just now. Hey Corey, thank you so much for being here, and yeah, such a pleasure to have this conversation and talk with you, because I've seen a lot of your perspectives and what you've been sharing online, and it's just really resonated with me.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Any posts in particular? There's a lot of them.
There were a few, now I have to just remember, but I think just particularly, I feel like the way that you speak is so clear. It's very defined and refined. There's no, messing around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was telling a friend recently of how much time, well, I mean, in retrospect, it doesn't really take that much time to write stuff because it's kind of always flowing, but I guess more so like attention, like attention to detail. Yes. In particular wording, and you could change just one word in a post and it could change everything, kind of thing, right? Like it's pretty like once you start, I feel like as you really start to get in tune with aligning how speech and expression like matches up with your internal world, or like how, like the true authentic self, you start to see like how much you have to be like aware of the words and how you express and all of it, right? Especially now, because people are so sensitive, so which is fine, because it helps you like reflect on, okay, like what am I really choosing to communicate, right? But yeah, that's a good reflection. Yeah, it's so important. I think you can never underestimate how much you can really think about the words you're using and how powerful that is. Yeah, and how it really does affect people. I mean, we're on social media sharing all this stuff all the time, and you could be sharing stuff that really is impacting somebody in a positive or negative way, and changing the course of their day or their week, or so it's easy to just post things and then 1,000 people see it or whatever, but that it really does ripple.
Yes,
So,
true.
it's important we're clear about what we're sharing, I guess. Something I've constantly been humbled to.
Mm.
Mhm.
Love that.
Uh-huh.
So you normally, just how I like to start before we go into it is just if we can just take a few deep breaths in and out.
Sure.
And then, yeah, if you can just share how you're feeling right now.
Silent, peaceful. How
Mm.
about you?
Yeah, also definitely feeling quite peaceful, even though if you look outside, it's a bit chaotic. Yeah.
Sure. I know you, and I know you wanted to do it in the daytime, so it's better light. And then I was like, oh, it's pouring rain today. I'm like, oh, it's all good.
Really?
It's been snowing here too. I don't know what it's like over there with you guys, but
Wow.
winter is here.
Yeah, so you're in Canada.
I am, yeah, right near the capital in Ottawa, Ontario.
Nice.
Mhm.
You were born there, right? You're from
I
Canada.
was born in on an army base nearby, and then my dad was in the military, so we went to all the different army bases in my younger years, and then we settled in Ottawa, the capital. For I've been here for 21 years or so. So I've it feels like home pretty much.
Yeah.
And nice, yeah.
Yeah. Do you like it there?
Yeah, Canada's got a real close place in my heart. I mean, um, I've been to a lot of other places, India, Thailand, Costa Rica, Nicaragua,
Nice.
and in the States and stuff. And I mean, they're all nice places, Costa Rica in particular. But yeah, there's something about Canada I just always come back to, even the winter. It's like it's such a magical space. Like the land is so big and it's so dense. Like it's such a strong energy. And I mean, people have very different opinions now of Canada due to the nature of things here,
Yeah.
but even on the surface, as things kind of are presenting themselves as chaotic or whatever. In my view, the energetic reds here are very strong. They're still very stable either way. So it's important we don't get washed up with
Mm.
the hype of emotion on the surface of things, right? But yeah, and I mean, Ottawa is the capital. It's kind of I don't know, it's only 1 million people. It's kind of a balanced size. Um, and it's just a lot of energy to transmute here, I would say. There's a lot of that. So we're placed where we need to be placed. I think that's kind of
Yeah.
something I've always come back to. Right, traveling is a very um, you know uh, attractive thing for a lot of folk, especially like us. And freedom and sovereignty and being awakened and all that. But there's also something to be said about just being where you are, wherever that is. So I just kind of ride the wave with that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting because I feel like it's quite similar for me. I've done a bit of traveling, but London just always keeps calling me back.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I like what you said about it's quite stable, the grids.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these spiritual hotspots on the planet, Bali, Costa Rica, India, and all these places,
Yeah.
Hawaii, Peru. I mean, they're so potent. There's such a power to them, and there's a reason why a lot of people are drawn to these places.
Yeah.
And then in other viewpoints, infrastructure wise and all that, it isn't necessarily that strong. So there's other components to look at, when we're dealing with a very fragile time, a time where there's a lot of things that could kind of go in different directions. So it's important we stay grounded,
Yes.
to what's,
Yeah. This
you know,
is so important. I feel like for me, I've had, yeah, really, really felt like that's exactly what I need to do, and
Hmm.
it's right here. And I feel like, you can really be like, oh my God, there's so much going on. I need to go somewhere else,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is fine if as well if that is, if you feel called, right? But then
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I feel following soul resonance is always it.
Yeah,
And so it's not really a not to travel or to travel. It's just whatever that soul resonance is. And when
yeah,
you're really listening and you have that clear communication line, where you can heed that call in the right time,
that's cool.
um, you'll be where you need to be. I think
Yeah,
that's what's important, right? But I mean, some of the greatest,
yeah,
masters of the past that I've learned from, I mean, some of them are living right in the heart of Mumbai or something like this, so it's like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
enlightenment or awakening or coming to realize your true nature can happen anywhere.
yeah, exactly. I love Mumbai, Bombay.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's something about that place. I love it.
Crazy, yeah. Oh shit.
Yeah,
I remember when I was driving back in there from Pune, and well, I had a taxi driving me. It was like the biggest roller coaster I've ever, like, I've been on these huge roller coasters in Canada and stuff, and then you go on that, it was like wild. I was like, oh my goodness, like the amount of people and cars,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's crazy. So cool. So
It
cool.
is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I think it is important to be grounded right now, like wherever that is for you.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, always. I mean, it's really the time. I mean, if anything, that's the real. I mean, in the spiritual space, there's a lot of interest in going not just physical places, but going places like within your consciousness, within
True.
dimensions, within
Right.
the higher realms and all that. But in reality,
Yeah.
the only way we really gain access to those higher dimensions of those expanded consciousness states is when we're grounded within ourselves, right? Like this
Mm.
is like the revival of the feminine, which is much a theme right now in even in the spiritual space. A lot of people are talking about the feminine, awakening the feminine, yada
Yeah.
yada yada. I mean, really, what does this mean in a practical light? It means the ability to embody our expanded, dimensional self within this present moment awareness, right? So that's what I view to be the true definition of grounding. It's rooted within present moment awareness while still expanded in all of these states and being able to access these states, right where you are, right in your body, right here, even with the eyes open.
Mm.
um, and that's really how we embody and anchor, these higher frequencies or these higher versions of ourselves within our, moment to moment reality, and how, the earth is then healed, and our communities and our friend circles, family circles, like the things that are most dear to us right here. um, that's really the doorway to that, when
Mm.
we're feeling that ground and embodied in ourselves and all that, right? So it's a
Yeah.
paradox, I guess.
I really like that. It's interesting because there are so many different aspects to it. Like the really 3D physical realm. And then, like you say, these higher dimensions that you can access to. And then, yeah, I don't know. How did you feel about just, I feel like there's a whole revolution going on right now.
Hmm.
And I like what you said about being grounded and, wherever you are, it's where you're supposed to be. How do you feel about, because I think there's a whole like movement, people wanting to go to like a specific area and, but then also you can do it right here, right now, right? What are your
Hmm.
thoughts on that?
Well, I feel like we have to kind of get, like, yeah, more specific with ourselves when we're listening to these inner calls, right? Because
Mm.
there can be an inner call that has like a clear resonance, as to say you're tuning into a part of yourself that already exists in a particular grid. Because that's really the case when we feel called to somewhere. What's actually happening is we're remembering an aspect of ourselves that's already there, and when we go to that place, it's like we reconnect with that aspect of self, and it's like, oh, we feel at home here. I feel at home, and you hear with people like going to different places.
Yeah,
So that's one side of things, right? If we're
yeah,
feeling like making a move, somewhere. But then there's other sides where it could be just a temporary thing because it's a part of like a part of your contract. It's a part of your path to be in a particular place, for, maybe more ground like 3D reasons, or maybe higher dimensional reasons where you're holding a certain frequency for that location, for a particular time. So that could be that. But then it also can come from places of trauma, maybe you feel lonely, you feel you don't have connected community, and you feel like if you look at, some other place in the world, it's like, oh, it seems like there's a bunch more community over there and you'd like to go there, and so that could be practically helpful, but often if, wherever we go, there we are, the issues we're dealing with here are going to come with us, right? So although environment can be helpful to deal with those challenges, we still are going to have to face those same challenges. So often people are just, you may for a short while feel better, right? But then all of a sudden the same things are kind of popping up, right? Like a relationship, or like, a job, you leave one and then you go to the next and it's the same thing, right? So I feel we have to be very discerning within ourselves, about the reasons, and of why thoughts come up to do things, and in this case, move here or move there or whatever, right? And the other thing too is like, we often think we have all this free will to do like whatever we want, and it's true, but there's a lot of like natural aligned, pathways that are kind of already etched within our karmic field, right? So we often are going to find ourselves in the places we really need to be, with or without us, kind of thing, it's like whether we want to or not, it's just going to kind of happen, right? And I feel the more we come back to that like natural flow of decision making, where like I feel like the more mature you get on this path, the more you see that things don't need to ever really be that drastic. It's like when you have to go to the bathroom, you just kind of go up and go to the bathroom, it's like it's not this drastic decision. And in my view, like all of our life experience can kind of be like this as we harmonize back to ourselves, where going to some place of this, it really should feel natural. In my view, it shouldn't feel like this like huge stretch. And if it does, maybe there's something going on there, you know what I mean? Not, not to say we, not to move outside of our comfort zone and, this type of thing, but I feel like things can kind of happen quite naturally in that regard. Instead of always thinking up this kind of like idealistic spiritual version of ourselves, you know what I mean? That, I don't know, lives in Bali with the tea and meditating on a mountain or some shit, you know what I mean? Right. Right. Because in truth, it's a frequency thing, right? The pockets of, let's say, like safety, or the pockets of ascension are going to emerge in cities, outside of cities, in rural areas, in very dense areas, like they're going to pop up everywhere. So each of us are going to have different, responsibilities in that, and they're changing too. There may be, it's like changing seasons,
Always.
So yeah, different dimensions to that topic for sure.
I love it. It's so intricate. Exactly. So many different dimensions, so many different things. It's not to say one thing completely, because you also have to consider this and, But I like what you said about feeling natural, because I feel like I can definitely resonate that with my path. As I've kind of progressed, it just feels like things just become less intense, In the end, it's just like, even if it's something so dramatic, a past version of me would have been like, whoa. Now it's just like, just another one.
Yeah. That's it, right? I mean, I'm often reminded of like, whether people believe in past lives or this or that. I mean, in my view, it's like we're an eternal soul and we've gone through many lives, and, across millions, if not billions, or even longer years. So, when we're thinking in that type of scope, like thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of years, when we think of like the next few months, or the next few years, like, although it is a very important time, and we're in a time where we could say time is accelerated, we're still dealing with very short cycles comparative to the grand scheme of things, right? So although every moment's important, it is also important that we remind ourselves of that bigger, expanded lens, which kind of dissolves like urgency and this like, oh, I got to make something happen, or
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because often that's coming from a frequency that's not so pleasant.
Yes.
So it's just gonna manifest more of that most of the time, right? And yeah, so it's important we just it's important we really just listen though. It's like we're really listening to the signs and symbols of our reality, and what's popping up and what we're tuning into, and we'll be guided. And even if we do, it's like I remember one day I was on a bridge and I was looking down at the pillar that was in the water from the bridge, and it's like the water was like equally going like around on the left and then around the pillar on the right. And of course the water just kind of like merges back together when it gets around the pillar. So it's kind of like that, right? Like often we think it's like, oh, is it left or right, is it left or right? And then like even if you go left, often you're still going to match up with what, even if you went right, like either way it's going to kind of just like come back anyways, and you're going to face those same like core karmic lessons or situations that were meant for you either way.
Either way, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like our hair, like we haven't had a choice in like the way our hair is grown or the shape of our nose. Like of course you get plastic surgery, but like naturally it's all kind of like forming itself in a way that you really have no control over. And in my view, like the paths of our life have a lot of those elements too. There's a lot of free will components to it, but there's certain components that are just kind of like almost etched, and
yeah,
they're coming for you either way.
Yeah. Love that. I've definitely had moments as well when I've made a decision and been on a flight, and you're just feeling so calm and just like, and I feel like when that happens, I know this is the right movement, But also I love what you said about different pockets of people in so many different places and cities and all over. But yeah, I think that sometimes it can, some people might be feeling it's really difficult where they are, like for what's happening. Like I've heard so much is going on in Canada, right? For example. So
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
There's just such an urge to like want to get out of it. But I don't know, I feel like it's kind of happening in a lot of different places. How can you escape it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that gets into like, more details about, the reality of what we're facing now and how long this kind of plan, so to speak, has been planned for. Like we're dealing with like very long cycles in time, going back very far in our history as to why we're dealing what we're dealing with today. So to think like, we could just go to one country because that country's going to be somehow better off than this. It's like, well, sure, it could be, but on another element, like we're dealing with a whole world endeavor, that is across all lands. Like all lands are going to have to face with similar karma in many ways, right? And on another end, like it's like everyone's talking all this stuff about Canada, but like I mean, for me, it's like, well, I don't know, where is this? Like, where are these things you're talking about? It's not that they're not happening. Like, they are happening in different places, but it's like when we really come into the practicalities of our own frequency bubble, we really do have a very strong effect on what is in or out of that bubble, right? So I was joking about this the other day about how, like, to be honest, most of this stuff only exists when I go on social media. You know what I mean? Or when I go on the internet or go on the news, like if I'm not on those places, like a lot of this stuff just doesn't exist. Like I don't come across it in the ways that people are saying, like, and that's not because it's not there. It's because I've taken responsibility for all the ways in which I interact with these dynamics. Like if I'm not going to go and associate myself with places that are trying to force things on this, or if I don't need to go to a restaurant, or I mean, I don't go to any of these places, so I don't need to have a pass because I just don't do those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Likewise with just the way that I've lived in my life over the past, 3-4 years of, really trusting in the flow of things like, gift economy and the natural like culture of community and like what does it mean to be amongst others of similar frequency. It's like, well, I mean, I'm constantly kind of going and finding myself in these pockets, of people who are in that same wavelength where it just they're everywhere, but yet it seems like they're so sparring and there's nobody around and everybody is just a sheep or something. But it's like, well, no, I mean, I think that's just an excuse not to take responsibility or to really start to look at, the fact that you do influence, and what is your frequency range? Like, what is the range you're at? And does that carry with you in all these in the other environments that you go into? I could be in the dense city of Montreal, 5 million people, and I still find pockets or communities or places where people are very much in the know about what's up and what, who they are and, what have you, right? It is true that a lot of them are starting to happen outside of the city. So there's more stronger pockets starting to emerge in more rural, these off-grid, communities, like things like that are starting to pop up more. I surely noticed that.
Yeah.
But still, like, it can be found anywhere. And even if it's not with other people, it's just yourself. So just you in your own bubble alone, wherever you go, you can be fine. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's really important because yeah, like everywhere on the planet is going to be facing similar things. I do think there are going to be stronger pockets than others, and we have to listen to ourselves about where we may feel that may be. But yeah, it's kind of a world event,
Yeah, it is a world event, exactly.
And then like when we even say that, it's like, well, what's the world other than an idea, that we're all collectively holding together, and what's our own world, like my world is different than your world, so it's very much there's an objective element to it, but even that objective element is still fabricated through all of our subjective lenses, and we can kind of see that happening, but like a splitting of sorts happening within that, right?
100%. Yeah.
The splitting it's apparent.
Yeah. Yeah, so much to talk about. So yeah, I think this responsibility thing is quite big, really, isn't it? Because I mean, yeah, if you're not doing that, then how are you going to find those pockets, find that? And what you said about, yeah, holding your own frequency. But this whole thing, I guess, anyway, it takes, a certain degree of self-development, and self-inquiry to even get to that place, right? But I also feel like even for those who have done a lot of that work, it's even more asking us to just step like forward, and it's like a little bit of a push.
Yeah, or like just the same reminder we've gotten probably like millions of times,
Yeah,
like
that's
over and
true.
over, right? Like just an endless reminder to come back, to what is true, what is actually real,
Yeah.
and exist within the private nature of yourself, like because I feel that's the other component to this journey is like really knowing when and what to say, within the spaces or environments that it actually can be heard, because
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing I've learned over this 10 years of sharing and, maybe, yeah, teaching people or guiding or teaching myself rather, really,
Yeah.
it's been a process of really just listening to who actually wants to hear it, like, I think because we can obviously go and stand up on like the center square and yell to everybody that, wake up and this is what we gotta do. And I feel like there's people for that and there's people doing that. What I've learned more and more, and what I've been more attuned to, as much as I'm, active on social media, I'm still relatively like a very small fish in the sea. And within my immediate surrounding, I'm pretty to myself, and I find myself desiring to becoming more and more invisible within this time, because it's like going out and battling anything. I mean, that's surely not of interest. And then going out and trying to like convince people of things, that's also really not of interest, it's really just, again, it's that frequency thing, like we're together here, sharing things on a similar wavelength, so it's enjoyable, and other people who listen are going to be in that. And then sure, there may be still an oscillation range of, you know, a frequency, but it's pretty similar, you know, and that's what helps to kind of like build it up, right? And it's kind of when we get into places or environments where the oscillation range is very different, that's when we start to find ourselves in kind of like maybe we get drained, or we feel like we're talking to a wall, or you know, we see like, oh, there's not, or it's just like unnecessary challenge that comes with that, you know what I mean? Like if, I don't know, you're trying to go to a place and they want you to wear a mask and have the V pass and like all these things, and you're like, well, it's too much of an effort really to try and you know, it's like it'd be best to just find another place, to be honest.
I see what you're saying.
Right. And so I found myself coming more in that invisible space, you know, where I feel like that will really become even more prominent as we move forward. You know, that element of literally just those who are in that frequency, they're kind of just like dissolving from the reality, you know, not like into a higher dimension, which that could be it, but more into these like safe zones, you know, these pockets.
I love that, safe zones. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that also resonates with me because recently I basically restarted my Instagram page. And I also had a similar, I was just like, you know what? Because the whole way that program is running is like to get more followers, to get more likes, and I was like, it's really not about that right now. And it's also not about trying to talk to everyone. Like you said, you know, and just realizing this whole thing about the resonant frequency, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so, yeah, that's it. Like, that's a really good point. You know, that element of like quality over quantity. I mean, that's always been it. It's always been really the case. I think also the distortions in the worlds of, you know, influence, be it in the more kind of matrix celebrity realm, or even in the more like popular spiritual teacher realm, you know, or whatever.
100%.
It's the same kind of distortion, right? It's kind of like almost like a savior complex vibe.
Yes, we've seen for so long.
Yeah. Which, you know, from all the great wisdom carriers that I've learned from, like none of them really were in that vibe. You know, they were actually fairly unknown to most people until after they died, or, you know, even people I know in this lifetime that are like what I view to be some of the most adept people on the planet. They, like, some of them are not even public with teaching, you know, like nobody even knows. Like you go on their social media and you'd have no idea who they are, kind of thing, right? So I find, that's really a humbling lesson over and over, right? Because I mean, especially for the younger folk, because we understand the social algorithm and like how to post things and how to gain the followers or do this and that. But even for me, when I post something that's like a little bit more, you know, I don't know, talk about COVID more, or talk about aliens, or talk about like things that are more like emotionally charged, then the intensity of the virality that happens is so quick. And then, you know, you have such a mix of frequencies of people that come in from that, you know, that space, right? Which can be nice, but also can be kind of like distracting too, because, you know, you're like, well, you know, are these the beings that I really, you know, and to be around, or I want to be around right now, you know what I mean? You know, without judgment. But it's just
I hear you, because that's exactly why I was like, I don't know, it's like I want to be more authentic. I'm not going to work with everyone, and you know, and I know that. So like I was like, let me just restart and just like try and, you know, get more people who are on a similar vibe. Really, that's it.
yeah, that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah. So I would love to hear about your journey. It's interesting you said the people that you've learned from have kind of been out of the public domain, but yeah, I feel from what I've seen, it sounds like you've gone down so many different avenues.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I am a triple air sign, in Sun Gemini. So, you know, information and knowledge, and like, information, knowledge, like those two in particular is like, it's been always such an interest. Because like I thrive off the analysis, the thinking, the the diving down all of these different pockets of information and then assimilating them in a really, magical way. And that feels right for me, and it feels right to express. And so, yeah, I mean, like, path has been quite vast in that respect, and I'm attempting now to like organize things more, because I understand how like one day I'll be talking about this thing and the next day about this thing, and it's like there's so many topics that moves through me all the time. Not only through my experience, but I feel like when we come to a certain place on our path where like there's a certain omnipresence that we're connected to, where you're kind of like receiving these downloads or these pockets of information about almost anything, like quite consistently, which I feel anyone on the path can relate. Initially it can be overwhelming, but as you start to get your stride and you're grounded in it, that's where we become this like sun or like a star of creativity, where like things can constantly be moving through us. That could be from all different types of things, because we're like, it's like we're assimilating all the archetypes, of the magician, the priest, the warrior, the caretaker, whatever, and that's all like moving through us in this kind of creative expression. That's kind of how I've seen the path on my own journey, even going into these like different groupings, whether it's more of the fitness space that I started with my younger years, fitness and nutrition and bodybuilding, martial arts. I was like, chasing the kind of UFC dream for a while, pretty seriously in my, younger, late teens, early 20s. Then getting into the more entrepreneurial path, and that element in the West is kind of like a spiritual path in itself, like entrepreneurship and all the lessons that come with that in business and these things, and being an artist or being a creator in some respect. So that was those initial years. That really got me into more like personal development stuff, right? Like Tony Robbins and emotional and like that kind of world, right? Which is still very kind of focused on like me, like the personal me, and wanting to be someone in the world, and be empowered, and which is a part of the path, because most of us grew up in a disempowered environment.
So true.
Right, so then we kind of have that explosion of, well, I want to be empowered and I want to be someone, so there's this kind of like move to the other imbalance, which inevitably is going to humble you at some point, right? Which it did for me in a series of out-of-body experiences in early 2012. And through like meditation and psychedelics and all that stuff. So that was really like my first contact with God, I guess you could say, outside of like my early, like from when I was like really young. Because when I was really young, I was actually really into God and wanting to be a priest, and I had a lot of like paranormal experiences when I was like a child. But that was like, often, that, like most people, that's often suppressed or rejected, or all the things, right? So coming back into contact with like spirit or God or energy or these topics that I really didn't care about, I just wanted to make money and be powerful and you know what I mean, like leave some legacy in the world. That's really all I was interested in. But then you get humbled through life challenges, and then you're turned inwards, and then maybe you start to contact a sense of God self or spirit or energy that like I said, like for me, that was never really a consideration. It's not that I was rejecting religion or these things. I just didn't care. It's like I have better things to do, kind of thing, right?
Love it.
So that kind of really like sparked things. And then it brought me back to like when I was 16, and I started seeing like numbers like 444, or I remember asking my mom, like I kept seeing it on the clock, or I would wake up at night, and I'd be like, Mom, like I keep seeing this, like what is happening? And she didn't really have context to explain anything to me, but it was like, oh, like these things are happening to me and all that, right? And so 2012 was, I guess for a lot of people, that was a year where a lot of things were kind of popping off. So, I'm sure for you, or 2011, I guess too. So it kind of was bringing everything to light, as to like this path I was on, from like fitness and martial arts and entrepreneurship and, all the personal development stuff, even like Eckhart Tolle stuff in like 2008. But again, like experiencing something and reading in a book or watching a YouTube video is like a whole world.
Yeah, very different.
Right?
Yeah.
So that was really when things really popped off, in regards to like deepening into myself, and so I was very intense with the psychedelic space in those first 3 years. That's why I speak so clearly to it now
Yeah, you
about,
do. Yeah.
about mainly my aversion to them and how I wouldn't really recommend them to most people,
Oh, this is
which,
so interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting, especially because most people come to me now who are just waking up and they start talking to me about that, and if I would recommend it, and most are surprised that I'm
Yeah.
pretty adamant about
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
uh, which is funny, and I guess it's also part of my own integration still too, but it's like I went through such a intensive period with that where I don't really come across that many people that I can have that can relate to the intensity of that. Although most of us, I think, who've gone into it have experienced some level of it. But I could really write a couple books about all those experiences.
So
And go
just
ahead.
wanted to add that. No, I know what you mean because I've kind of been down that avenue as well. And I just noticed that not everyone is having such intense experiences.
Yeah. I mean, you grow up maybe in it. I remember growing up in my teens, and I had all these like drug dealer friends, and it was the same thing. You just smoke and chill and eat or whatever, or even or you take mushrooms at a party or something like this. I don't know, but yeah, on this journey, it became quite ritualistic, and it really started to tap me into a lot of past lives with the same tools that I've used, and it was really just a big karmic clearing. That's the way I viewed it.
I like that one.
Yeah, and end of 2015 where it came to quite an abrupt end, because I pushed it to such a limit that my energetics just like couldn't handle it anymore.
When was it? 2018.
What's that, sorry?
When did you say it come to an end?
2015, around there. There's a couple times after that,
Yeah.
but it was like a forced like crown chakra popping open in one of those experiences that was quite dramatic in its effect. So I was pretty deep into the whole ceremonial culture, and it was only one option. I had to get out of that. And literally, like, it was a couple weekends later that I went and, got initiated by a Himalayan guru, and went down the Kriya Yoga path for a couple years,
Wow.
which was like a key shifting point from, attaining these like very high level states, both in closed eye journeys and open eyed walking reality, from the use of these tools to then having to like rebuild almost, using breath work and meditation and self-inquiry to get back to these levels of being and these levels of states without the tool, which took a lot of effort, right? And that's part of the reason why I've pointed a lot of people to like straight to those tools, or straight to Yana Yoga, or straight to Keylontic wisdom, or freedom teaching stuff that I'm quite affiliated with, because to me it's like that's like the direct path often to attaining a lot of these states or these abilities, out of body, expanded consciousness, activation of superpowers, all of that, but doing so from a more methodical, grounded, natural approach, right? Where you're not, because much of the analogy I've used with this is not looking to push the pendulum too strongly in any direction, right? And so say we go into some psychedelic experience and it's like blown open thing, and we're just like experiencing like infinity, for the next like 2 hours, and then we collapse back down and we come back into this reality. It's almost like we push that pendulum so strongly in one direction that it's almost inevitable it's going to come back in the other. And so the body's going to go through this real intense integration period. There's going to be like, the biochemistry is going to have to rebalance. The organs that were drained, often the liver, the kidneys, that kind of thing, is going to be drained because all the energy in the blood's rushing to the brain. That's going to have to rebalance. So there's all these karmic elements with that, which, maybe you just do one experience and you really take your time with integration. Maybe that could be okay. But the reality of that pendulum pushing, in my view, is what causes us to kind of stay in that seeking wheel, you know, for enormous amount of time, you know.
Yeah.
Right. So the more we're able to like heed the path in a way where we're methodical about how we're dealing with that pendulum, and we're not ever pushing things too strongly.
Yes.
That's where I feel like the path actually ends up going faster, because often when the pendulum comes back really strongly, we tend to slip up, and we may make mistakes that actually make us push the pendulum again, and then it's like we're not really actually going anywhere. We think we are,
Yeah.
but there isn't actually that much progression happening. It's a very small progression in comparison to some of the more advanced paths, you know, like you mentioned, like self-inquiry and, you know, advanced yogic, you know, or Buddhist practices or things like this, right? Um, so it gets very like you have to be like really detailed with that, I find, right? And it's very subtle. You know, most people are so dense that you need the psychedelic experience to get out of that density. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah, you need that shock. Yeah.
exactly, you're like cracked open the armor almost,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Which I understand too, but yeah. So a lot of
This
things there.
interesting, yeah. Like, I mean, I didn't really go. I mean, I went deep, but it wasn't. I wasn't doing it loads, and
Okay.
but every single time, I just had the most intense experience. And then, even if I'd like taken tiny little bit of mushrooms or whatever it was, you know, it was just like this. And in the end, it was only like 3-year journey as well, I think. And in the end, I was just like, you know what? Life is the lesson. I can learn this in life, you know, it's gonna come to me anyway. And I was like, why am I putting myself through this like intense thing all the time? Like, what?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like typical, like, I don't know, like a fitness perspective, like no pain, no gain type thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Wow, that's so true.
it's very similar. Like much of the personal development space, which I view to be pre non-duality, pre enlightenment. You know, going up even into like, yeah, like the advanced personal development, brain activation. You know, like even like Wayne Dyer type 5 stuff. You know, like it's all great stuff, and it's all actually important, especially when you're dealing with like the psychological components. You're dealing with trauma. You're dealing with a lot of like foundational components of our, you know, dimension 2, dimension 3 bodies. But as soon as you start going, when you really start to prepare for the greater ascent, you know, which is coming into true non-duality, or you know that you know, if you're you know, if you're coming into more samadhi states of yoga, or the yanas, or you know, the bliss states of yoga, Buddhism, these things, like these stages require most of those things to be dropped. You know, like they're not coming with you. You know what I mean? Into those, you know, like I used to make fun of like the, you know, you're not taking like your crystal packet and your shaman on speed dial, and you know, like that stuff's not coming with you into those, right? It's you and yourself, right? And God, right?
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yeah.
Right. So so yeah, and the thing is that uh it's all good. I mean, either way, we're gonna come to the lessons regardless. And the lessons in my experience have been just you and your intimate self is all you need. And you know, even in the realms of like, you know, fasting and healing, because that's another avenue of the path that I got really involved in, because I had been so sick for most of my younger years, that and you know, all the health issues, all these things, and then nothing ever really working, and then realizing, well, it really just came down to like a raw fruit diet and fasting. Like that's all I needed to heal. If I just got out of the way, listened to my body that wanted more space to breathe, I could heal all the things that I had dealt with for so long, you know? So same thing. It's like in the space of spirituality, we only really need ourselves. We need ourselves in our own meditative space, our ability to really tune to our own natural guidance that says this or that, or to do this or that. And then in the space of healing, it's the same thing. It's like just an open space to rest and fast, you know, or to rest and to treat our bodies with the natural elements that the earth provides, is the same thing. We have everything we need, and we can heal pretty much anything. If you know, everything kind of simplifies. back into these natural things that we have like right at our fingertips. And that's actually what gives us the ability to navigate the infinite complexity, because the universe is infinitely complex beyond our wildest imagination.
Yeah.
But if we navigate it like simply and naturally, then we won't be overwhelmed, right?
Overwhelmed, that's exactly the word. That's the word. It's mad. Yeah. I mean, it's so crazy. I feel like just from what you're saying, I have a lot of similarities with my journey as well. Like, I also got really ill at one point, and then this whole journey for me has been figuring out what the hell is going on in my body. And again, tried so many different things, and then I realized, no, this has got nothing to do with that really. Actually, I need to, and I fasted, and fasting, like water fasting, so helpful, crazy. So funny that is. I mean, there must be a lot of people, similar experiences, really.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's all, really just listening to ourselves and, coming back to our bodies.
Yeah, and just that direct connection to God source, the knowing that we are that, and all is that, and it's only ever been that, God source, like manifesting in every thought, word, action, every object we perceive, every circumstance, situation. It's only ever been that. We've just perceived it in other ways, or we believed it to be other things.
Yeah.
So then we play into those stories, we play into those beliefs and those illusions, and that just perpetuates the same disease, drama, challenge, confusion, overwhelm, like you said, right? But in truth, it's only ever been this, like the truth. And that has, that it's like, we can't really say anything more to that. It's like it has to be known, it has to be directly realized for oneself through the practices, that have been given to us. And I mean, that's the thing right now, we have access to everything, like everything we could possibly imagine when it comes to like the highest spiritual teachings available in the universe are accessible here now. They're here, like we can get them, we can find them, if we're authentic in our intention. And so that's that. So like we said before, like there's no excuse now. Like if that's really true, like if what I'm saying is true, then it's just a product of our responsibility to do the work and practice and engage, and like you said, the life is your practice, like just that in itself, like treating life with utmost devotion, that every moment's opportunity to awaken to the truth, then every moment will be an opportunity to awaken to the truth, like you'll just be shown, right?
And that's exactly what happens in the end. Like in the end, my body just started healing, I would just have moments where I just feel surges of energy just going. It was like this huge purge,
Wow, yeah.
Just on its own, and it's crazy. It's amazing. And then, just back to the psychedelic part. It's so interesting because I feel like, I think my intuition was naturally just saying, okay, you can stop now.
Yeah.
There was something, yeah. There was something that was just like, every time I went there, it was confusion. It wasn't really clear. And there was massive like fear. And people will say, oh yeah, but that's what's inside you. And I'm just like, yeah, but I'm not really feeling that in my day-to-day life, Like,
interesting.
Every time I go in there, there's this like huge, massive, like, it's crazy. And then afterwards I came across some other information that was like, actually, it's not necessarily that good for you.
Yeah, I mean, the new age culture, I mean, it's predominantly younger people, and although there's elders, but there's a lot of younger people in the new age culture. And when we're young, we're usually not so humble to things. So it's like if we start experiencing these like blown open experiences, we get really convinced, that, oh, this is it. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's the strong kind of opinionated nature. Because like I was joking, like when I made that recent long post on psychedelics, it was almost like it was actually pretty tame on Instagram, but on Facebook it kind of popped off. And it's like it's almost like you're talking about like the V or something, you know what I mean? Like it's like the new age equivalent of the V. Like like
Yeah.
the strong emotional opinions. And anytime something comes with that, you know that there's a mosh posh of distortion in that soup,
Oh my word, that's so true.
right?
And it just shows the attachment as well, you know?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so strong. And I mean, and that's exactly the point I was making pretty much, you know, like, so it was like proven in the pudding
Yeah.
of what tends to occur in those dynamics.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like as we mature and we're not so strongly held to our opinions, we start to see what is true, and truth doesn't care about our opinions.
Yeah, literally.
You
Like a
know,
trailblazer.
right? And I mean, that's kind of like the humbling pie that I got when I came across a lot of, you know, the great teachers or mentors or masters that pretty much said the same thing about them. They all had different teachings, but they all held a very similar energy of true, like realized embodiment, and they all
Mhm.
said the same thing. You know what I mean? So it took me a while to listen,
Mhm.
um, you know, and like you said, really just listening to my own intuition that was saying the same thing the whole time, anyways.
Mhm.
But waiting like, you know, a couple of years to, you know, just keep going
Yeah.
and you know, all that, right, for whatever reasons. But yeah, and I feel like that's the thing, right? When we come back to, because like the true maturity on the spiritual path is learning energetic subtlety,
Oof.
right? Like, right,
Yeah.
being able to feel energetic subtly, read
Oh my God.
energetic encryption,
Yeah.
you know,
So
being
true.
able to truly read encryption, right? Because reading encryption, in my view, is very, it's so nuanced because it's so easy to get caught up by the presentation of things, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
you know,
100%.
say, like, I was talking to my friend about this the other day where we did a podcast and we were talking about like movies and TV shows and stuff, and how, you know, initially on the awakened path you may like resist all those things, like, oh, I don't want to watch movies, I don't want to listen to any music, or, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
that's actually like a productive aspect of the path, you know, that can be helpful for a time. But then when we start to really like tune to energetic subtlety and reading of encryption, it's not so black and white, you know what I mean? Like
It's really not. Yeah.
right? Like you can watch a movie that activates you in a particular way that, yeah, sure, is made by Hollywood and has all the, you know, programming and whatever. But there's something about it that helps you feel something, or you pick up on something, or you're in a symbiotic exchange with the movie where literally by your observance of the movie, you're healing those aspects of distortion that are held within the movie, right? Because you hold, you know, we do hold that power and potential.
Yeah.
So nothing is so black and white,
Yeah.
uh, right? And it's only when we've developed that level of energetic subtlety and maturity
Yeah.
where we actually can start to feel into the many layers of one topic, right? And I find that takes that there's nothing really that is a shortcut for that development, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
right, being able to learn that, you know, so, or develop that skill.
So
uh,
true. I think what you said about the films is, yeah, if you watch it with awareness, then it's a whole different thing, you know?
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
this, I mean, yeah, what's the how in developing this energetic subtlety? Because I feel like it's such a, like, you know, what you said here, embodied practice. I can't remember the other word you used, but you know, it really is a thing to be able to, it's like, it feels like such a superpower, but it actually, you know, to really feel, tune in deeply, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or how did you develop
How did
that?
I? Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind now is really the initial place is listening to our body in a really very practical manner. You know, like for instance, I don't know, say we've been working on a project for a long time and we're feeling like really exhausted and tired, and it gets to a point where like we're starting to really push through, and like we're pushing ourselves to a point of like real intense strain. um, there may be a validity to that. You know, maybe there's a deadline, maybe there's something that it's very important for you to finish that. So that's up to you. But then there's also an element of like, well, what is the body really saying right now? Maybe it needs like a 20-minute nap, you know? Maybe you need to go and just take a walk. Maybe you need to go and like take a shower. Maybe, I don't know, take a glass of water. Maybe close your eyes and just watch your breath for a moment, you know, or just be silent. um, when you really kind of like start to listen to the signs that the body's like speaking, it's actually really simple. as to like, well, how can we navigate this flow of energy now? Like, I don't know, if I'm sitting on my chair for too long, okay, my lower back starts to hurt. Well, it's kind of obvious. So let me stand up. Let me go for a walk. Let me lie down. Let me do some yoga. Let me stretch out. It's really like that simple in regards to like initially just listening to our body. Though, we could say like the vast majority have never really been taught to listen to the body, or have been taught to push through pain, because success or attainment is on the other side of that pain. But we've kind of seen where that's led most of us, right? So just that in itself, I feel, is like the initial practical doorway to engaging because all we're doing is we're starting like with step one. You know what I mean? Like, if we do exist on this 15-dimensional scale, where we have a 15-dimensional self that is right here, right now, but we're only really practically aware of, say, dimensions 1 to 4, right? 4 being the astral, right? 1 being etheric, 2 being, emotional body, 3 being ego mental, 4 being astral. So most of us only in the 1 to 3 range, just starting there, right? Just starting to actually reconnect our mental egoic mind to our emotional body is like one really important step, right? Of how does our emotions communicate? How does our body really communicate in forms not in language, not in English, you know what I mean? Like in forms of sound and tone and body energy and emoting and all that. So just the playing with that. I mean, there's many different practices I give in particular to that, but really just the simple listening, like moment to moment awareness, that's accessible for all of us. And then you may find that you never considered maybe not eating for a day, like a 24-hour water fast, but all of a sudden when you really listen to your body like keeps telling you like, hey, I'm not even hungry, why are you feeding me? You know what I mean? Like like we don't need to eat right now, kind of thing, right? Or yeah, you haven't been sleeping right because like you're not exercising enough, you didn't go for a walk in like how many weeks now, like go take a walk, like a long walk or something. When you really listen, it's actually quite simple to start to tune to that subtlety. So if you're listening to your dimensions 1, 2, and 3 body, well then the dimensions 4, 5, and 6 will start to open up, right? Because you start to listen to this level. So now you're going to start to be able to hear the much more quiet, but still fairly obvious when you're attuning to it, other dimensional layers that have other information that it could be helpful for your well-being and for your sense of peace and that type of thing, right? And so like obviously like meditation and self-inquiry and using various forms of energetic activation, whether that's breath or visualization or other forms, which could get really simple, or we can go into really advanced many step processes. But just the practice of it, just the starting of it can be very helpful, because again, then you open 4, 5, and 6, then 7, 8, 9 open, then 10, 11, 12, and then 13, 14, 15. So these many dimensional layers, we don't need to rush into them. And again, that's why I've pointed away from the very drastic forms of practice that really push the pendulum very strongly, unless they're done in a very safe container, because you may start to access these higher realms, but you're not even really ready for
that. Yeah, that's
right. You know what I mean? Like you're not even really listening to these other layers, so it's kind of like you kind of have steps missing.
Yes.
So it gets kind of weird, and I remember that that's taken me quite a long time to heal those distortions, because it's like building like a skyscraper, but like you kind of miss a couple levels, or you don't pay attention to some level. It gets kind of ridiculous. Right? Yeah, that's it. Right. So my view, I mean, meditation's always been a very important element, and meditation is so vast in its definition, right? There's so many different styles and different elements to it, right? You can use meditation just like we did, you just start in silence, you just watch the breath, or you can go into meditation where you're journeying through through the universe, you're going out of body and you're traveling and journeying, and I use all of them in the different in the different time that they're
Mm.
required, right? But it's just, yeah, like I think there's a lot of practical ways that we can just access right away.
Mm.
And we've mentioned fasting, and it's not just about the fasting, but I think a less is more attitude with consumption overall
Mm.
um, gives us more access to these subtle dimensions. Because if we're, eating heavy and we're consuming, a lot of social media and, consuming a lot of, people energy, saying we're with people all the time, you know, um, we talked about the media. There could be a balance with that. There could be an imbalance with that. Too much entertainment, too much stuff. So if you're consuming all this stuff all the time, your body gets quite dense, right? So it's kind of hard to decipher. Well, what's your body and what's like someone else's body? You know what I mean? or other forms of information that may not be really relevant to you, but you kind of just picked up on it, or all these
Yeah.
parasites in your body from all the food and.
Yeah.
So less is more attitude with consumption generally gives us more access to those lighter and more subtle dimensions, I find.
Mm. Wow, so much was shared there. I think
Yeah.
it's so important to now just, I mean, obviously with what's happening in the world, but just in general, I just feel like there's so much misinformation. So this is what you described as really important, so that we can learn how to navigate our own bodies because the information is coming to us, and that's kind of where it all begins, like you said. Yeah,
Yep. Yep. And it kind of doesn't really matter like where we're at on the path.
I love that.
We're always gonna get like the next Timbit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the next little like breadcrumb on the breadcrumb
Yeah,
trail.
yeah.
It's just that generally the more like in suffering we are,
Mm.
the more we want like the like if there's like step 1 to 100, it's like we want step like 99 or 100. Like we want to like get there as quickly as possible because we're in such suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's how people miss breadcrumb 1,
Mm-hmm.
or step 1,
Yeah.
because the mind is constantly looking for step 2 to infinity. You know what I mean? Whereas step 1 is always like generally like right. It's like, okay, this is what you can do like right now.
Mm.
But it's usually not that drastic. It's usually not that glamorous. It's usually quite mundane. It's kind of boring. It's nothing too spectacular. So people just like, whatever.
Yeah.
What's the next like shiny object, right?
Yeah, like meditation's not, it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and that's the thing. I mean, yeah, like if I told people, well, yeah, it's going to take you probably quite a few months or even years of constant meditation to develop the ability to visualize like you would if you just took a hit of mushrooms. Well, it's like, well, I'll just take a hit of mushrooms. I mean, that's how I was, right? But now, if I can say, well, you can do that on command. Like after you develop that, you could literally go into a psychedelic trip like on command almost.
Yeah.
Well, that would be something great to develop.
Yeah.
If you have the patience to do so, the discipline and all that, all the things, right?
Patience and discipline, definitely.
Yeah.
I like the way you described the 15-dimensional matrix. How do you see it? 'Cause I like the way yeah, it's like different, like what is it? What are these different dimensions? And, how does it work in this quantum field?
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
actually have
different views on it. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, there is quite a few yeah, there's quite a lot of different views on dimensions and all that. I mean, obviously, I'm not sure if I think you're familiar with the Keylontic system or Keylontic Science or
Yeah.
Freedom Teachings material, right? So much of my journey has led into that. And in my view, because I went into so many different paths before, it
Yeah.
was such a homecoming because so many of the other paths are kind of encrypted within the
Yeah.
freedom teachings, like you'll
Yeah.
find the Buddhist mantras or the
Yeah.
Christian doctrine, or it's like it's like the teaching of everything almost. And although it still has its own distortion, you could say, or You know, nothing, no like human-made system is going to have it all. It's probably the closest thing we have available on this planet, regardless of what everybody is saying about it, because there's still a lot of drama, and there's drama in every spiritual community. But it's quite fascinating. But I like this diagram here. Actually, I can share my screen. I'll just show it because it's quite nice. It was just like a simplified version. I don't think I can share it. You have to give me the
I have to
permissions or whatever.
Allow to. Maybe I change the host. Does that work?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's still recording. Yeah, it is. Nice. So yeah, here's a nice diagram that outlines the 15-dimensional the 15-dimensional matrix here.
Yes.
Like obviously not overlaid on the body, but and then you have your sound fields and you know source fields before that. You know, technically in the teachings now there's a very clear distinction between what we would call external teachings or external creation, which is this form of dimensionalized existence. And then there's also an undimensionalized internal world, which is just as complex. But there's an internal creation as well that it's like you could, if you understood source as like this bubble, it would be like you have external creation that happens within the bubble, and then you also have this internalized creation that happens even before that bubble is even created almost. So it's a very interesting dynamic. But you know, these dimensional layers, I mean, it could be related to different things. You know, they have their own Cathara grid or tree of life as well. But another version of this that's kind of more overlaid on the body is with the auric layers, right? So, you know, we have 15 chakras, which each relate to one of those dimensions. And then you have all of the auric layers as well, you know, or the various fields of the body. And this is more of how I've experienced them, you know, where it's like layers of the auric field that you can expand into, you know, through visualization or just expanding consciousness. And, you know, this is how you'll begin to access layers of, you know, other layers of your anatomy, like your Merkaba, which is like a Star of David looking, you know, tetrahedron shape, which you technically have one of those for every dimensional layer or every auric field. And as you move through those layers, you'll feel the spin of it, like it's like your own little starship. You know, it's pretty cool. So yeah, it can get quite complex because then also the Earth has its own version of this, right? And our whole time matrix. So we have our Earth here that is a part of the dimensional 3, you know, dimension. But then you also have Tara, which is dimension 5, and then you also have Gaia, which is dimension 8. Then you have Lyra Aramentania, which is kind of like the highest version of Earth, I guess you could say, which is in dimension 12. So you have all these different versions of the same thing that exist simultaneously, but in different fields of existence that we don't have, you know, present, you know, awareness of, right? So that diagram is this one. You know? We have, right? So inner Earth, Tara, Gaia, Lyra Aramentania. So it's, you know, it gets quite complex, and again, it can become very, very theoretical, or you know, kind of like it can get very much like in our heads about it. But I think, like, you know, once we really start to engage the teaching, so whether it's engaging these types of works, freedom teachings, Keylontic work, or other people who are sharing similar stuff, you know, I attempt to share my version of certain elements or practices that we can start to viscerally experience these levels. And then, you know, as we're moving through these collective activations, we will have these activations happen within us, or have already had them happen within us naturally, you know. And we can start to tune into these layers. And again, like, the teachings are only the map. We have to experience it ourselves to really know. Like, it's like you can learn all you want about what a Merkaba is, but when you start to actually feel it spinning and you literally can see it, like, and you feel like you're in like your own little spaceship, you're like, oh wow, that's what it is, right? So I think that's where we have to go. And going back to like the breadcrumb show thing, if we just keep following the breadcrumb trail of direct cognition, direct experience, that's all that matters. Like, it doesn't matter like where we match up to somebody else and what their experiences are, or, what so and so is activating or whatever. Like, we have to just go with what we are directly, while staying like humble to the wisdom of others, of course. But our direct experience always comes first, and it always comes back to that. So, yeah.
What's your as you are able to, access these other different dimensions, it's also like physical, right? Or,
Yeah. Well, there's different levels of looking at it, right? Like, technically all of time is happening now. And time is more interconnected with space than we think of it. Like, if we were to go to a particular place in time, it's like if we went on Google Maps and like we went from one place to another.
Yes.
That's essentially how time is, right? So all of our cells, all of our present incarnate cells are all existing simultaneously. And, so a version of ourselves, let's say on Tara or in Gaia or in Lyra or in internal creation, that aspect of ourselves is literally existing now. So in spaces where, let's say, we're in a meditation, we have a vision like of a higher version of ourselves, or, we say we feel like we're connecting to a guide or something like this, higher self. That version of ourselves is presently existing in a different time space reality, right? Whilst time is simultaneously existing here and now that we have access to, right? So part of the element of this time right now is our ability to embody that 15-dimensional self in this body.
Yes.
Right? Like, if we were to go back and look at like a being like Yeshua 12, which was Jesus Christ, from the Keylontic version of, the terminology, we're looking at like an avatar who has access to the full 12 dimensions of themselves in their body, right? So that's a vast space, like existing as a star with many different incarnate selves existing simultaneously. It's kind of hard to comprehend, right?
It's really hard to comprehend. That's
right. Yeah. But
it,
I guess in my experience, what I'd say is that it's very practical in the sense that it makes everything far more purposeful, but also purposeless also, because it's like, if you have, thousands of present incarnations happening right now, some on this earth that you can meet up as, you view to be your soul family or a twin flame or a soulmate or something like that, or some being that's existing in another place in the universe that you're not presently with, but is still there. If all of these incarnations are happening simultaneously, then the one that you're in is vastly important, but you're also kind of like relieving the weight off the shoulders, because there's many other things happening that you're not even maybe presently aware of that are contributing to your awakening, contributing to your present level of peace and all of this. So it's like, it makes us less focused on the personal me, you know what I mean? Like, this body and this purpose and what I got to do in this world and how important I am, you know what I mean?
Or like a surrender and flow.
Yeah.
I like it, this, because I feel like, people throw around the world, we're multidimensional beings, but what does that really mean? And this is why this information, I feel like it's just like, oh wow, it gives a definition to it,
Yeah.
And also I resonate with what you said about earlier about like going through so many different paths and coming to the chaos material and just being like, oh wow, this is like literally unifying a lot of it,
Yeah. That's it. And I mean, that's how we can kind of come to more and more objective resonance collectively, when we start to see that a certain, like, someone's bringing forth, it's coming from a pure place, or it's coming from a place of direct cognition of these higher dimensional layers, right? Because that's been much of my path, is the development of that communication with the source version of myself, or the avatar version of myself that is in these higher dimensional layers, that over time becomes the one who is speaking, acting, and doing through this body. It's not like this higher self that communicates, you know what I mean? It's like it's very intimate. It's not like this distant, right, thing. So it initially may feel that way because there are like distorted or layers between the dimensions that have limited our access to those frequencies, right? And limited our access to that communication. But as we start to expand into those layers and start to redevelop the structure of our template, our anatomy, we're basically redeveloping. It's like we're redeveloping brain synapses, but within the higher dimensional sphere, right? And those connections are giving us the capacity to like act as God would, in our body. You know what I mean? Like it's everything becomes this constant stream of download from the divine.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very practical in that sense, no?
Yes. Yeah, we have to remember that is the embodiment, really. So important. I feel like it's just so fascinating, And I feel like when I discovered all of this, it was just like boom, oh my God, it just made so much sense to me. I was like, whoa. And and another thing that I always feel is it's true for me, is just you got to keep it moving. As soon as you stuck in one particular teaching paradigm, then you're just stuck there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Even into like the micro version of just like one particular practice.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
like one practice could not work for you in that timing, and then you just stumble on another practice or another version of it, and then you're like, oh yeah, okay, well, this will work, and then you do that for a while, and then it's because in truth, like you are the teaching, you know what I mean? Like you said, life is the teacher, like because all of these teachings are just externalized versions of the divine blueprint, which we are.
Yes.
Right? Like we are like the most fundamental version of that, like, and so that's an important reminder. Like we are that blueprint. And although we may not be aware of that at the present moment, that is the truth. So the teachings just act as that reflection, and confirmation to come back into that, that knowing, right? Like, oh yeah, it's right here. I have that, like, it's always been here, and I am this expanded self, and all these things are happening already within me. So if I just bring attention to it and I cultivate it further with the techniques or activations or all these different methods, it's that symbiotic versus like hierarchical or like making a god out of a teaching or a teacher or something like this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I feel like just we're working through a lot right now. There's just so much. And you touched on some things already, there's some of the information and practices, even maybe they're just not necessarily completely truth, So it's like we're literally digging through this whole and it's not black and white either. There's so many different intricacies to it, so many different layers. And what could have been good for you one moment, later on you've moved past it. But then it's just so interesting. And I feel like, the whole thing about, following another person, obviously it's about using our own intuition and following our own inner guidance. But it's mad because I feel like even though some people, they are not necessarily in their own integrity, but you can still learn so much,
Yeah, I mean, you could take like one sentence from a book, you know what I mean? Like, and it could change your life or like spark something where you change your own life. But like, I mean, that's such that's like an endlessly, especially in the kind of like cancel culture vibe, world, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Because that runs, rampant even in the most advanced spiritual circles.
Exactly, 100%.
You know what I mean? And yeah, so like it's like you can call a spade a spade. That's just practical. But if it comes with a lot of emotion behind it, then often it kind of fogs things a little, and then it blinds you from things that can be received from whatever is being shared.
Yes. Because something inside me is, I don't know, it's easy to just say, no, I'm not going to like absorb that. And obviously there's other things that come into it because sometimes you're opening your field to some, your vulnerability to something that's going to attack you or whatever, I've heard about that. But at the same time, it's like, you know what, sometimes I feel like just take the pieces of what you need, you know?
Correct. Yeah. And I'm reminded again of the breadcrumb trail analogy because it's all a frequency thing. So the things that are going to be most relevant for the path at this time are going to stand out to you the most.
Yes.
That's it, you know? So if you, like I watched a recent presentation from a friend and it was 3 hours and there was a lot of really great information. And there was one main thing that stuck out to me the whole time.
Yeah.
And then I just explored it and it really opened certain things for me. Um, and so it's that, right? Like whatever's holding space and consciousness, like whatever's kind of like really screaming at you a little bit, then that's what can be, explored, and everything else for the moment at least can be just forgotten. And if it's to reemerge, it will, because it's always that matching of frequency.
Yes.
Right? Where, I mean, the past few years I follow a lot less people. I don't really watch many teachers at all anymore. I look at Freedom Teaching's work, and a couple other things, but for the most part, there isn't really much that I'm looking at, and it's not because I'm resistant to it. It's just that it's just a frequency thing. Like
Yes.
I'll pick up on the things I do like require or I'm matching with, but then the rest, it's kind of like it's there and then it's gone kind of thing. It's just there's almost like no effort. It's just it comes and it goes. Um, and I feel like when we're kind of more I guess say beginner on the path, or we're kind of just initially moving through things, the mind is the predominant, like the intellectual mind, conscious mind is the more predominant like like uh commander of the ship, if you will. So it's kind of constantly deciphering and analyzing and trying to figure out like what's this and what's that. And because there isn't really a trusting in the frequency aspect of it, that will always work in the way I'm describing. Like it will always say, this is for you and the rest can be dropped. It gets in the way because it's like, well, what about all these things? I need all those things too. And because it wants to accumulate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man, that's a great way of describing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I just think it's just not black and white, It's not like, oh well, now, that's the end.
Yeah, it gets the intellectual mind it wants certainty. So
Yes.
it needs that black or white, or it wants to say yes or no, or this is for me, this is not for me.
Yes,
That
exactly.
But if you're not really caring too much about that, it's kind of like I kind of related. I guess I'm reminded right now. I had written this, and it was about like boundaries, like the idea of boundaries, and how I was relating boundaries to the idea of like the skin. Like the skin has natural boundaries just by way of its very nature. Like you don't have to uphold the boundaries of the skin, other than like, just listen to, the foods or I don't know, the creams and shit that you're putting on the skin or something like this. But really, like when you come back to nature, like the skin does its job like very naturally. And so when it comes to like boundaries, there's kind of this big movement. I got to hold boundaries. I got to put up my boundaries. People are crossing my boundaries. Blah. But the reality is, like, again, if you come back to the frequency aspect of things, the people who are meant for you in your experience are going to be there, and the people who aren't are not. Like frequency works in a very like scientific manner.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if people are crossing boundary, you could also look at it this way, where they're not really crossing boundary. They're really actually helping you reestablish the natural boundaries that are supposed to be there anyways. You know what I mean?
I feel like that's a big one for a lot of us, because I don't think we were really taught about it. So it's just like knowing how to,
Yeah, well, it's recognizing if you know who you are,
Yes.
then who you are not becomes very clear.
Oof.
So that's kind of the way I look at that. Again, coming back to the frequency thing, right? It's I don't know. It's kind of I keep getting this image of like the master on the mountain. Like doesn't have to do anything. Like the people who are meant to come to them, come to them. The things that are not meant to be there, don't ever touch them. Like it's just it's kind of, it can be as simple as that, but we are navigating a very complex.
Yes, this is exactly it. And I feel like it's just a constant reminder, because it's just mad, because everyone is just at different places, different stages, different posts, and And it's
Hmm.
like this thing that we just are literally moving through. And, you know, no, it's not like we all have, like you said earlier, like that anything that's here is not full, whole and complete, you know? So it's just like we're just moving through this crazy, you know? And
Yeah.
obviously it's not, yeah, even the people who are gurus and all of this, it's not like they have every single answer, you know? And they, yeah,
That's it.
are
Yeah.
human. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, what was I gonna say? I'd like to hear what you said. Something happened in that period of time that made you kind of like change direction with the psychedelics and plant medicines. Uh,
Mm.
with your crown chakra? Or?
Yeah, I blew up in my crown chakra one afternoon. Um, I just took a hit of the bong, and then within 30 seconds, my eyes were open, and my crown chakra was exploding like a star, rainbow star, in the center of my head. And I could see it, like while my eyes were open. My eyes weren't closed; they were open. I could see the star exploding in my head, and it was as if, like, like you see, like I don't know, like animations where it's like a star or like a light exploding and it's like cracking through like rocks or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that. Or it was like that, but my skull, and I could feel the cracks in my skull, like almost like exploding. Um, I don't know if my brain actually experienced trauma. I would assume that I experienced trauma from it because I could feel physically like my brain almost like popping. But it was extremely frightening, and it lasted for not that long, maybe 30 seconds to a minute, 2 minutes, and then I kind of like collapsed on the ground a bit. I was kind of like in a semi unconscious state. It was very weird. And I was kind of in a daze for like a couple of days after that. And it was pretty much then that I knew like I couldn't keep doing this, because it was actually that whole summer that I was doing it in a way where I was able to like activate all these like yogic cities, like the superpowers. In yoga they call them the siddhis, siddhis. There's 16 of them, and they're like being able to read minds, telepathy, see the future, biolocate, levitation is one of them. I wasn't able to do all these, but I was starting to activate a lot of these, um, because the energies were so potent that I was too afraid to close my eyes in that summer. Whereas previously I would always do like 2 3 hour 4 hour journeys, generally with marijuana most of the time. And in that summer I've been fasting a lot. I was doing a lot of juicing. I had built up my energies a lot. So it was like the energies were too strong that I was afraid to close my eyes at that period. So I had to do all these experiences open eyed. But that's how I started experiencing all these like activations of like superpowers, and I felt like I was like a superhuman walking through life and shit like that. So that creates a lot of like ego attachment because it's not really authentic. So you start thinking you're fucking Jesus or something, and all these distorted elements start activating. And then yeah, it led to that experience, and then it was a couple of weeks later that I went and got initiated by my first Himalayan teacher, Himalayan master, who's pretty popular on YouTube. His name's Yogi Raj Siddhanath Guranath. Um, and so I was with him for a while. I was in India, I was doing that, which was extremely powerful. But that was really like, out of all those experiences, which was about 300 of them, and then I had awakened when I was 16, so it was still already like a good, almost 6 to 7 years, like in a lot of different practices. It was only at the end of that period that I really felt like true progress was starting to be made. Like
Wow.
when it came to like true non-duality, like activating more enlightened or some samadhi states, higher consciousness states, right? Which was after, a very intensive period of Kriya Yoga, which was like anywhere from 2 to 8 hours a day of Kriya meditation and breath work, and then getting into more non-duality. That's when things really popped bubble open, to be honest, was getting into more yana yoga or self-inquiry, which kind of puts everything else to shame almost, because you're like, holy crap, I've just been dancing around the fire this whole time when really I was supposed to jump in the fire. You know what I mean?
Wow, I love that.
So yeah, and that all happened when, because during that whole time I was running a community, I was running a wellness center, So
Yeah.
I had, propped myself up as this like great like teacher and knew all the spiritual stuff, but it was kind of on a weak foundation. So when I started going through that real humbling, that's when actually the entirety of my uh, community started crumbling too, and my relationships and everything started kind of like falling apart. And that was because that was like the real ego death that needed to occur, the spiritual ego death, if you will, right? And and then it kind of
Oh,
navigated into what I view to be the real like the real deepened aspects of the path, which led me to other teachers and other reincarnated masters that I came across within the Keylontic and freedom teaching community. Um, and so that's been many years now, right? Of uh,
yeah.
those stages, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, it's been a wild ride.
Wow, I love it. It's so cool that just to, the whole ego death thing as well. I loved that you were able to just admit it. Do you know what I mean? Just
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
open and clear and just like, yeah, then because of all of what was happening, it led me to, put myself on a pedestal, I guess, in a way.
yeah. It's that
Oh,
hierarchical like
yeah.
guru paradigm, which I mean we see this happen so many times, like again and again and
Yes.
again,
Yes, yes.
right? Like even in beings who are authentically enlightened, those who are like
Yeah.
residing in true
Yeah.
like absolute states. There's still a lot of integration that happens after those levels. It's why like
Oh,
even in the
right.
Zen tradition, right? Zen tradition, you wouldn't be opening your mouth as a teacher for like 7 years after like a true like enlightenment or awakening in a Zen monastery, right? So there's a high level of discipline, whereas in the West it's like we learn something and then like the next day we're sharing, which is fine because it accelerates the path on some level, but it also creates more room for distortion too.
Yes.
um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? But it's very much the revival of the feminine, because
Yeah.
if you look at like the yogic scene, a lot of it is very patriarchal. Like it has a lot of male dominant kind of hierarchical vibes, and that's very clear in a lot of the guru structures, and then a lot of the modern day guru structures who've had a lot of issues, say with like sexual elements and like just weird shit going on with disciples and stuff. So you could have an authentically awakened being, but still have those issues because there's psychological trauma. There is an integration of awakening the heart and gut, because you have the awakening in the higher space, which often would be illustrated by the halo around the head. But then you also have the awakening of the heart flame and then the gut flame,
Yeah,
which
my
would,
favorite chakras. Yeah.
right? And then that would relate to also flame body in the
Yes.
freedom teachings, right? Which is like the true, a higher version of light body. So that takes a long time to integrate, and it's like a real humbling, and
Yes.
it's a real like coming into the feminine, like
Mm.
compassion and love, and
Yeah.
like these types of things, right? Because again, like you can be an awakened being and still an asshole. Like it doesn't mean,
Yes. I
so yeah,
Yeah, I really love that definition as well because I think again sometimes we really just try to make it black and white, It's either you're on that path and everything's perfect, but it's so especially how you describe it with relating to the chakras. It's like it's a whole system, and it's not just like all of a sudden it's on and all in
yeah,
one go.
yeah. I mean, it can work differently. Yeah, different stages, different things. I mean,
Yeah.
I find the predominant path has often been, um, you know, because the way I've kind of explained it, at least in very general terms, is like there's a vertical dimension of awakening and there's a horizontal dimension of awakening,
Ooh,
right? So
yeah.
a vertical awakening is like awakening of, like, say, the yanas or the samadhi states, or the various bodies within, like, say, Buddhism, right? Like you go through the Hinayana path, Mahayana path, Mahayana path, or sorry, Vajrayana path, right? Like you're going through these various stages, and in each stage you're activating like higher states of the, like, essentially enlightenment or the awakening or non-duality. Jnana yoga has the same version. Even in Vipassana, they have the various stages of Vipassana, right? And then in yoga, same thing. The many layers of samadhi. right? Because you have samadhi, but then there's many different versions of samadhi, which like all come back to let's say sahaja samadhi, or just like the natural state, or nirvikalpa samadhi, which is more in the Kriya tradition, which is the highest state of consciousness in their version. So all of those stages and all those states are kind of like the direct path, like typical non-duality, like the direct path to truth. So that to me is more like vertical. But then horizontal is like, what's your level of embodiment of, like, say, like in freedom teachings, kind of like the virtues, right? Love and compassion, community, communication, your relationship with power, these things. Or like Buddhism has a great, because the thing that I didn't finish about the yogic element is the yogic is usually very patriarchal, whereas Buddhism is a bit more the feminine. It's a bit more circle based, right? There's more the lamas, and even though you can still have that guru vibe, the lamas it's a little bit more holistic, like more feminine. The feminine's more balanced in some of those groups. So this is where you'll find a more rounded out awakening a lot of times, right? And this is exemplified in some of the either modern day beings or past beings. But yeah, so that horizontal dimension could be very different. You know what I mean? Like they say you're getting into more body healing, like fasting and stuff, and healing aspects of the body. A lot of times that will happen naturally from, like, say the vertical dimension, right? Like you were saying, but it doesn't always mean that. Like you could still be like overweight and not really caring about your diet or something, and that could be an element of your integration.
Yeah.
Right. So my view now, and my view, say, of the freedom teachings, is that it does encompass a lot of the full wheel, let's say.
Yes.
But I also would say, like, every teaching actually on some level has that. It's just that it's more to do with ourselves, like what's our karma, what's the path we're going to take, and I feel, yeah, it's very important that it's a full spectrum awakening now.
Yes. I love that full spectrum awakening. Yes. And that's why we're seeing, people falling from grace and all this, because I like how you said it. It's like there's another like level to it here. And yeah, sometimes I think it's the thing. It's like, unconditional love. It's like that's so vast, and to actually embody that is huge, But sometimes, some of the teachings, they don't necessarily incorporate that into it. And there's also obviously that whole other aspect of, this whole process, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's just, I guess, when you fall into the trap of the guru dynamic, although like teachers and mentors are very important, but if it gets too imbalanced, then it's going to hold the distortion of that teacher, right? So whatever teacher, like whatever energy that teacher's in, that's the translation that the blueprint is going to flow through.
That's like to understand.
Yeah, exactly. Like shining a light through a prism. If the prism is distorted, the prism will shine out those same distortions. Because in truth, like a lot of these original teachings, like of Buddhism, of yogic tradition, even in Christianity, esoteric Christianity, and then certainly like freedom teachings, there's distortions in all of them, but they do have all the pieces. Like awakening enlightenment can happen in all of them. It's just that it requires like just like the utmost like discernment and discipline, and because let's say like all the traditions have like the golden rule within them, treat another as you desire to be treated. To me, that's both the most entry level teaching and the supreme teaching simultaneously.
The
right? But I love it. That's it. And then if you go on the path, and then you're you're like really involved in your meditations and very involved in like the esoteric aspects, or it could be very easily like you kind of forget about that original teaching. So it's important that all the paths are balanced. And like if we reference yoga, you have jnana, you have hatha, you have bhakti, you have karma, Kriya, like you have all these different paths of yoga that, in my view, are all, it's not like they're all perfectly equal for each being, but they have to be kind of used in cohesion, and they will be used in cohesion because we're naturally engaging in all those aspects of each path every day anyways.
Cohesion, good word. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It has to, yeah. So, yeah.
Where are you now? So do you still do some of those like Kriya Yoga practices, or I mean, I know you said you don't really follow people.
Yeah. I feel there comes a certain stage where, well, I went through a certain like set of activations and transmissions, which was like a Shakti pod that kind of brought me into what would typically be viewed as a non-duality or a non-dual realization. And there was many stages of that process, but that was a very visceral, like drawn out process for me that was what really shifted a lot. And one of the main elements that it shifted was, you kind of become, it's like you actually become the teaching rather than viewing teachings, kind of thing, right? So what I mean by that is the practices, they become a part of you just as much as like your hand is a part of you, where it's not so much like there's still routine, I guess, in my life on some level. I may want to do a certain practice or focus on a certain technique or something like this, but it's all kind of naturally happening a lot all the time anyways. Like the downloads, the insights, the epiphanies, the karma. It's almost the way I've experienced it. It's like the brakes are off. So I don't have any like brakes anymore to like stop the process or try and control it. The knot is just constantly undoing itself. So I can kind of contribute to that on some level, in other forms of activation or alignment, in forms of meditation or breath work or using code, using tone, using mantras, tone and sound. But it's kind of like in this cohesive mixture, like it's kind of all happening, and I may spontaneously be brought into a meditation or, called into chanting things at a certain time. It's quite a lot more fluid, I would say, than it was previously to, coming into this. And I would also say that what we've typically viewed as like authentic awakening, self-realization, enlightenment, even in the dissection of different stages of that process, because not all enlightenment is the same. There are different stages to that, and it's actually very scientific as opposed to what people kind of throw around. You know what I mean?
That's one thing. Definitely.
Right. So even in what we've typically viewed as, like, say, the highest stage of enlightenment on this planet, in my view, from the new dropping in of the frequencies that freedom teachings have brought in, that wasn't really like freedom teachings bringing in. It's just that's the time in our history where we're accessing now higher layers.
Yes.
That's what at least from my direct experience, those layers or levels of awakening, enlightenment, whatever. And I'm still integrating those components years after now. It's just the beginning of a whole new book.
Oh my God.
It's not any particular like end point as it's typically been viewed. And that was also reinforced for me in coming in contact with reincarnates of beings that are quite popular in the spiritual space. That, I mean, I'm sure, I know in the new age, all kinds of people all over the place are claiming they're reincarnated of this or that. But when you start to develop a certain level of like subtlety and sensitivity, and you also kind of like get to know somebody, how like some of these individuals I'm speaking to, like for instance, are not public. So for me, that's like a pretty clear, that's a big signpost, because if someone's claiming there's somebody and they're not out there telling everyone there's somebody, to me, and on top of that, they have a certain level of adept knowledge that's beyond your wildest imagination. It's like there's all these factors that combine. You're like, okay, well, maybe that is true,
I love that.
So my point being, whether these people are them or not, what it was just reiterating for me, and some of them, I do truly believe that they are the beings they're claiming to be. It just reminded me that, well, we thought that these beings were done. We thought that these beings were maximally enlightened. Like they would never need to come back. You know what I mean? What is this earthly plane? You know what I mean? But that's just not the case, because every single one of those great masters that are some of the biggest names in the spiritual space, to from my knowledge and understanding, they're pretty much all back now. So, you
Yeah.
know, that humbles you back into a whole new level of, well, wait a minute. Well, if they're back, then you know what I mean, what am I chasing in regards to some final enlightenment, or
Yeah.
you know, that type of thing, right?
Love that. Yeah, where am I going?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so insightful.
Yeah, that was pretty big for me, because I mean, I had always considered, even before I came into those states, like, well, what's after this awakening? Like, what's after these stages? Like, what would be life after that? You know, and nothing could really answer it, because it was always answered as if it was like you're existing in this like void of nothingness or something like this. You know what I mean? And while the realization of the void is a very real thing that I've also experienced, and it's a very visceral thing,
Yeah.
it's like it's the most like magical paradox, because although you've realized the void, you're also still very much here. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
I
it's
mean,
quite a vast topic, right?
yeah, I think that is the paradox with a lot of I don't know, stuff that I mean I've stumbled into. It's like, oh yeah, you're going there, but you're staying here, but you're also going, but you're staying, but then it's gonna change. Like,
Yeah.
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 The simplest way I put it now is like it's the beginning of eternity, you know?
Ooh.
Like that's really what it means to awaken. You're awakening to the eternal nature, which is eternal. Like it's you know, it's like yeah, I mean, there's certainly stages. There's most definitely stages, and these stages are very peaceful in my experience. Uh they're very different than previous stages of my life, but in the same light, it's like still endlessly humbling, because you're like, well, yeah, and then there's still endless other stages that it's more that the seeking energy dissolves, like this
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
get somewhere,
yeah.
or to find something. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? It's like
yeah.
you found it, but then you're like, well, I found it, and now it's I have eternity to explore it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I love it. So just do you think that like after discovering KS, has it made some of your other practices not really relevant or not so much? Just intrigued about that.
um, it's well, the thing with the KS and freedom teaching knowledge is that there are particular aspects to that path, or particular practices or techniques that, in my experience, are very potent and efficient in their ability to activate or bring levels of peace with consistent practice, right? Like anything. Um, and at the same time, there are many practices within all their traditions that also have certain capacities, right? So um, so it kind of becomes a mixture of personal resonance and a little bit more of like an intuitive dance, where you're not necessarily wanting to change practices too much, but there is and can be a level of adaptation,
Mm.
right? So for instance, one of the old Kriya practices would be to breathe up and down the spine, chanting Shiva, up and down the spine, Shiva, Shiva, up and down the spine, up and down the spine. And the purpose of that was to clear out karma within Shushunma, which was the essential channel. And so I remember doing that, you know, like I said, 2 to 8 hours a day, like just breathing up and down the spine. And that really does and can activate very profound levels of samadhi or expanded consciousness. Now, coming into like self-inquiry, where it felt even more direct than that, where I was able to activate, you know, a realization of the true nature, or to receive a transmission from a being that would activate that, um, which then brought me to these levels of expanded conscious states, like by default. You know what I mean? It was like always there. So all of a sudden now that breath work up and down the spine really isn't necessary, because it's like, well, I could do a couple breaths and now I'm there. Like I don't need to go for hours anymore. You know. So I feel like certain stages, the leaves just kind of fall off the tree,
I love that. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Coming into Keylontic frequencies and then activating, you know, these higher versions of let's say, Kundalini current, because you have
Yeah.
your original Kundalini current, but then you have, higher versions of that frequency. So combining those frequencies with, say, an old form of breathwork or technique, that can be very helpful, because then you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, on a certain level, right?
Mm-hmm.
I found some elements of KS to be not overly complex, but like maybe not as conducive for regular daily practice on some level, whereas there's some elements in it that are really good for that. So I think it does become like this personal resonance thing. For me, I mean, I'm still meditating on a regular. For me, it's what's that?
Meditation is just like,
Yeah, I mean, it's like you become the meditation, right? So it's like almost happening all the time,
yes.
and then it's almost like you're kind of like in and out of it, or just deepening into it, coming out of it, going for a walk.
Mm.
So it becomes more of this like constant dance. That's how I've been seeing it, where I don't know, I'm on Spotify and I'm having like a fucking activation, listening to music, and then expanding it. Then I'll bring in some codes, or bring in a diagram, because I can feel that part of my anatomy. So then I'll look at it and I'll explore that as it becomes this like masterful weaving. That's kind of how I've seen it, right? But I've also developed some very profound meditation, emotional healing, trauma work, and energetic, subtle activation flows, where I've developed those through a lot of my previous experience. And KS has just given maybe some added components to that, but a lot of them still kind of has stayed the same in their structural integrity, because they were already so simplified and so direct already, that I felt like they're kind of good to go, kind of thing, So yeah, so I've kind of played with different things, and I still am, things spontaneous come up, and all of the above, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
That's the creative aspect. I think that's fun too, is once we've come to a certain level of abidance within ourselves, the creativity naturally blossoms through within us. So we're holding the structural integrity of these systems we've learned from, and we use those systems as containers, or as foundations, and then it blooms like in this creative, almost like artistic expression, where and that's why I still teach meditation. It's been almost 10 years that I've taught, and now like everyone feels so like epic, because like I've been graced with all these great systems, but it comes through now my own individual
that. Yes.
and we each have that ability.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I love that. The depths, when you go, you've got to just dig deep. And it shows. Amazing. I think we should wrap up soon, but what a great conversation.
Yeah, it was epic. That's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, a lot. I wanted to just bring it back to at the beginning, just to understand what your perception is of this split that is occurring. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we did talk about freedom teachings a lot, and there is a reference that they use in regards to the timeline split. Yeah. So they have a particular version of it that I do view as fairly accurate on some level. They've obviously taught a lot about the distortions with the Fibonacci ratio, or the Fibonacci spiral, and the golden mean ratio, and how that ratio is off by a little bit, but it's actually a lot when it keeps spinning out. And that's, we could say, a core aspect to the distorted geometry that results in all the forms of distortion we find in this time matrix, and specifically this planet. And then they've obviously presented the crystal spiral. That is, what they would say is the aligned geometry. And so I believe it's in November of 2023. Mm-hmm. I believe it's then, maybe before that, but I think it's November 9 or something like that. I'd have to look it up. That's apparently when those spirals hit kind of like almost like a tipping point of their kind of splitting off, where the crystals they cross over each other, and the crystic spiral will continue in its eternal life spiral, and that frequency of ascension grid or ascension and then the Fibonacci will just break off and kind of continue off into like phantom matrix, fallen, black hole pull kind of thing. And so their viewpoint is that between like 2023 and 2025, there is that kind of like piece splitting. It's already happening, but it's going to kind of peak out there. And that's where we may find ourselves in a place where that kind of almost like the other world doesn't even exist anymore starts to become more and more apparent. And so I do see it in that way, but I'm also never really too caught up on particular dates because not only is everything kind of a gray, like it's all kind of a matter of degree, but also because we're in very large cycles in time. So just one date or 1 year, it's very, very small in the grand scheme of the unfolding. But one way that I've described it, because it's part of my personal experience now, but it's also what I've learned in regards to physical ascension, because it's no longer really the path anymore for physical ascension, but but it's still kind of blending in the sense right? Where typically physical ascension would happen through stargates, right? We would go to a stargate in a particular key area of the planet, and we would literally walk through the portal and we're going to a higher dimension. So that's not really the case anymore. However, we are always kind of in this space, especially now, because we're creating frequency in such a fast manner and the difference in frequency is so strong, it almost does feel like we're kind of almost ascending or moving through a frequency band into a whole new reality that's still here on this physical earth, but it feels like it's not, right? It's like in its own bubble. So another version of ascension is called sliding, where you're literally sliding into a different dimensional band, right? So even here on Earth, I think there's like anywhere from 12 to 15 or so. It's quite a lot, different versions of Earth in this same plane. Some of them exist down into the Earth, like in the inner worlds, and some of them exist in the higher aspects of the atmosphere. Like, so that's why people have described seeing like star cities or cities in the clouds and stuff like that. It's because they're actually tuning into the frequency bands of versions of Earth that exist in those higher worlds.
And so, sorry, you're saying that that's in this universe?
It's in this Earth, yeah. It's right here actually. It's just at a different band of frequency. Whereas like Tara and stuff, they're in different places. They're not this Earth, right? Because people call Earth Gaia, but Earth isn't Gaia.
It's not Gaia.
No. So what I personally kind of like intuited in this time is that I already feel it, where I'm not really in the traditional reality too much. I kind of blend in and out of it. But there would be many times where like I would spend a couple of days where I don't even really have time to go on social media. I'm just traveling around locally, going to different little hotspots of people or friends' houses, little portals. And it basically feels like I'm in a completely other like world. Like I feel like I'm in these portals where like nothing, like none of the other stuff is even here. I don't see any of it. I don't come across it. And so when we think about, say, like more and more gathering starts to happen in that regard, say off-grid communities or little hubs in the city, say you're living with a bunch of people or you're in a close local, because it does have to do with the physical vicinity. Like if we're all in a similar physical vicinity and we're holding a certain frequency range that is not matching with the rest, it will start to create a whole different like parallel world almost, like a different timeline. So if we think of like bigger communities starting to happen, which they've already been happening for many years and they're starting to really pop up now, what I see is that there will be more of that almost sliding into like kind of like hub zones, like little because there are hub zones in the Earth's atmosphere that are of fallen nature. So this is where these fallen beings like essentially hide. So I'm not speaking of those, but I'm speaking of like basically just a frequency of a much balanced and harmonious nature that is of many more local people in our geographical vicinity that literally create like these hubs or these little groupings or portals that will still physically be here, but I could see them potentially even meshing into some of these other versions or frequency bands of Earth.
Yeah.
That the other dimensions of people may not necessarily be able to even perceive.
Yeah. So this is something
right,
I've heard. Yeah.
right. So I could see that, but I also could see it completely staying all physical. We're all still here, but there's just not much of an interaction between those worlds.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it. I do think that there could be crossovers with that, so we may have to deal with certain things or whatever. But who knows? You know, who knows really how that will happen? But I guess you know you can get the point of how I'm sharing that, right? And I think that I know that just starts individually, like 100%. That starts just with us, where we get so you know in tune with what we want and want to see and want to interact with,
and what we're not.
right? And then that other stuff just kind of naturally dissolves. Still there, but it's in a different plane.
Yeah.
And then we're in this other place, you know?
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Like for me now, I just feel more and more like no. Like I'm not going down there. Don't even try it. You know what I mean? I'm just like no.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it could end up like Hunger Games-esque, you know, where it's like like it's there's literally like sectioned versions, sectioned off places of the world. I could see that happening.
Yeah, I can see it as well. I mean, it kind of already is in some places.
Yeah. And I've also I watched something interesting from a guy who's more of a farmer. You know, he's more into the more 3D aspects of this, and you know, he's been about off-grid farming and stuff for a long time. And he did this podcast, and I watched it, and it was about North America, and he was specifically pointing out like how he sees things unfolding, and he was saying how like you know he views the powers that be in them as very lazy, and so they kind of like want things to collapse and fall apart on their own, so then afterwards they can come in as things have kind of like fallen apart to like instill their rule, you know, whether that's like China coming over or I don't know, or they come out of their bunkers and their underground caves and they're like, okay, now we're gonna and he was saying how like that's gonna happen much later, and in this next like say, you know, 1 to 5 years or more, it's a lot of just how we deal with those around us, like common people.
100,
right, and if we can manage to keep things harmonious and kind of rebuild as things start to collapse over this next period, when powers that be or whatever try and come and instill some rule, or if that's in the plan, it's likely going to be a lot more difficult than they think. And I see that. I see a lot of falling apart of this plan that has been set forth. It's succeeding on some level, but I there's a lot of holes, you know. And
a lot.
Yeah. And people are not like, some people are completely asleep. Some people are empty shells where they're not even human. They literally are not even human. And the people who are in between are not stupid. People are not stupid. They have, you know. I have faith. So yeah.
What is there anything you would say to someone who's maybe struggling a bit with this kind of, you know, on the level where it's impacting their relationships in their lives, in their life?
Well, I feel like everything we talked about today had a lot to do with like personal empowerment, personal practice, personal engagement, like engaging yourself, doing your work, going into the depths of your own emotions, your own traumas, your own stuff that essentially makes you feel not so great. Do you know what I mean? It's our own habits that determine our frequency range, our state, our you know, daily default like range of what we're feeling each day, you know, peace or guilt or sadness or anxiety, or you know, what is our more default range? We have the ability to navigate that and bring it to a level that feels, you know, very content. So that's the first and foremost thing. And there's endless practices I can share, you can share, a bunch of people that can, you know, provide things. And like I said, following that breadcrumb trail is the first most important component. Now, from there, as we're residing in our own sense of contentment or peace or well-being or whatever, this naturally is going to come into our, relationships, and it may dissolve certain relationships, certainly. But the ones that are meant to stay, then I feel they balance out if both people are willing on some level. And usually the stronger magnet influences the weaker magnet. Meaning, if you're experiencing more of a sense of contentment and peace and love in your own being, then that will influence those who are not more strongly than they will influence you.
Yeah, love
Right?
that. Yes.
So, yeah.
So, since 2020, what is one thing that you're going to take with you into the future?
I don't know. Whatever wants to come with me, I guess.
Love that.
I don't know. I feel we talked about like living more naturally, like doing things more naturally, more things that feel more natural, more peaceful, nothing really too drastic. I think that feels most alive, because there's no rush, and every big thing we think we need to do starts with a bunch of small things anyways. So it's not like you're going to be doing any big thing anytime soon anyway. Like, you know what I mean? So yeah.
And it's so, I mean, what you described is also just kind of what we've been talking about, just getting back to peace, really,
Yeah. Yeah, it's that simple, right?
And then, just going to end on this other question I like to ask everyone is, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom and the terms self-sovereignty or self-autonomy, they all kind of like ring true in that same light of essentially knowing you have everything you need. Like your naked natural self is everything you need. What comes already naturally from this body is really everything you actually need. Your breath, your awareness, the elementals, the movements of your emotions, your thoughts, your intention, awareness. Like it's all like encapsulated right here. So we can enjoy external things, but it's when we get attached to them, thinking that we need them, then that's when freedom starts to get cramped, I guess.
Yes, and it could seem like it's the opposite. Sometimes you think, I need that. That makes
more freedom. Yeah. That's it.
Oh, wow. Such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
That was wild, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So nice. Yeah, thank you for sharing everything. Your journey sounds like you've literally been all diving into every corner of it.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. Yeah, that's for sure. But thank you for holding space. I enjoyed this. You gave enough space for me to share, and you have a lot of really great points yourself too. And yeah, it was great. I like this.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I love what you're sharing on Instagram. I'll put your link in the description.
Sure.
I'll follow you for more.
Yeah. Anyone, if there's further questions, just hit me up or whatever. All kinds of stuff. But yeah, it's great.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, love.
Likewise.